Welcome to my channel Horror Studio, and please help me to subscribe her and watch my channel. Sterile hallways, and eventually got her seated on a hospital bed. She clutched the sides of the bed, her fingers white-knuckled, trembling with the terror of what she had just experienced. "I'll be back, Tessa," I said softly, kneeling beside her. "Please, wait here." She let out a shaky breath, wiping away a bit of blood that had seeped from under her gauze, and quipped weakly, "Where else am I going to go?" Falcone, her usual sarcasm flickered despite everything. The rain poured relentlessly outside the ER, and a cold deluge soaked me when I left the hospital. I hurried to my car, the heavy drops hammering against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. My thoughts raced, trying to connect the dots, but the only thing I knew for sure was that whatever had happened was far from over. I sped down the gravel road, the tires skidding slightly in the mud, and the storm only worsened. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the path ahead as I pushed the car harder, my mind fixated on the power station. I reached it in record time, pulling to a grinding halt outside the gate. The rain had intensified, coming down in sheets, and I pulled my coat tighter around myself to keep from getting drenched. I glanced toward the open gate, a dread creeping up my spine. As I approached the entrance, something caught my eye on the ground near the gate's edge. It was an odd bundle of clothing, small, drenched, and crumpled against the muddy earth. I hesitated momentarily, looking around, then crouched to inspect it more closely. The fabric was yellow. My heart skipped a beat. It was the yellow raincoat. The girl's raincoat. My hands trembled as I lifted it, the weight of the soaked fabric heavy in them. As I unfolded it, more clothing tumbled, a dress and tiny shoes, all caked in mud and water. It was discarded here like she had vanished. But where was she? A cold, creeping dread filled my chest as I looked around the empty power station. The rain hammered against the metal structures, and the wind howled through the broken windows, but there was no sign of the girl. It was like she had dissolved into the storm itself. Here's the revised version with the sudden realization that the girl who told the story is the killer and monster. I stood there, rain dripping down my face, staring at the pile of empty clothes at my feet. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. The soaked fabric clung to my hands, the cold seeping into my skin as I struggled to piece it together. Where was the girl? Why would she leave her clothes behind like this? Then it hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. The air felt thick, and my breath caught in my throat. She was the girl from the story. The girl who had sat in the chair, who had told me about Joey and Raquel. The one with the hollow eyes. It wasn't just a story. She wasn't the victim. She was the killer. My pulse quickened, and a realization washed over me. She was the monster. The raincoat, the eyes in the mouth and missing eyes, plus the attack on Tessa, everything started to make sense in a twisted, horrifying way. The girl who had seemed so scared but so calm, despite everything. She had been playing me the whole time. My mind flashed back to her sitting in that chair, holding the jar so tightly, and her calm demeanor as she recounted the horror at the power station. The jar. What was in that jar? A cold shiver ran down my spine as I looked again at the pile of empty clothes. She hadn't vanished. She had lured me here. The raincoat, the innocent act, it was all a mask. She was the thing from her story, the one who had taken Joey and Raquel and killed them. And now she was waiting in the power station somewhere in there, maybe watching, waiting, or worse. This is a great scene. The monster's sudden appearance, along with the disturbing description of her eye and vampiric teeth, really heightens the tension. The combination of supernatural horror and a personal threat adds to helplessness and dread. My chest tightened with dread as I slowly backed away from the pile of clothes. I pulled out my phone and walked cautiously through the abandoned building. Every step echoed, the sound of rain still hammering the roof. Then, from somewhere ahead, I heard a soft cooing noise. My blood ran cold. I turned in the opposite direction, not wanting to fall into any of the monster's traps. Suddenly, a deep, feminine voice purred from behind me. "Hey there, Tiger, missed me." A cold, mocking laugh followed. I spun around quickly, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing before me was a beautiful, nude woman. Her sunken, bloodied eye socket stared blankly at me, but a single purple eye was peeking out from her mouth. I barely had time to react, lifting my good arm and preparing to swing, but she was faster. Much faster. She caught my arm with an iron grip, and I froze as a slurping noise filled the air. The eye in her mouth retreated into the darkness of her throat. Then her lips curled into a grin, and long, vampiric teeth slid down from her gums like razors. "Now, Falcone," she teased, her voice dripping with amusement. "Is that how you greet women? How do you know my name?" Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely steady. Her grin widened, and she let out a low, menacing laugh. "Charlotte says hello." Before I could even process the name, my arm went limp. A sharp, brutal hit slammed into my side, and I stumbled backward, my balance momentarily lost. I gasped, pain shooting through my ribs as I collapsed to the floor, my back hitting the cold, wet concrete. The next thing I knew, she was on top of me, pinning me down with impossible strength. Her eyes, those empty, bloody sockets, hovered just above my face as she leaned in close, her breath hot against my skin. I struggled to move, but her grip was like steel. "Now let's have some fun," she whispered, her sharp teeth glistening as her smile twisted into something cruel. Her grip tightened around my throat, and before I could react, she lunged forward. Her sharp teeth sank into my neck, tearing off a decent chunk of flesh. Pain shot through my body, a searing, white-hot agony that caused me to gasp and choke on my scream. Blood poured down my neck, the warmth of it contrasting with the cold rain that hammered down on us. My vision blurred as I tried to fight her off, struggling against her inhuman strength. I swung wildly, my good arm flailing as I tried to push her off me. But she was too strong, her body pressed against mine, pinning me to the wet ground. The taste of iron filled my mouth as I bit down on my lip, my muscles burning with effort as I struggled. She laughed through the blood, her voice dripping with cruelty. "Not so strong now. Are you, Falcone?" she hissed, her breath hot against my skin. I could feel her teeth grazing my neck again, ready to rip into me a second time. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. A gunshot echoed through the storm, and everything went still. The woman froze, her grin faltering as a small, neat hole appeared in the side of her head. Blood and bone sprayed outward, and her body jerked violently. I gasped, pushing her off me as she stumbled backward, her face twisting in shock. I barely had time to catch my breath before her mouth opened wide, and the purple eye reappeared in her mouth, blinking with eerie intelligence as if surveying the situation. Another bang rang out, and this time the shot tore through her shoulder. She let out a screech, her body convulsing as she dropped to her knees. I turned my head, struggling to focus through the pain, and saw Tessa standing a few feet away, holding a shotgun. She was panting, her face pale but determined. The gauze over her empty eye sockets was drenched in blood, but somehow she had found me. I smiled, coughing up a bit of blood. "Get away from him," Tessa roared, her voice shaking with rage. The creature, the woman hissed in fury, scrambling to her feet. She shot one last look at me, her purple eye glinting menacingly before she bolted into the shadows of the building. Tessa fired again, the blast reverberating, but the monster was already gone. Her retreating footsteps echoed in the distance, swallowed by the rain. I lay there, gasping for breath, the world spinning as the pain in my neck throbbed. Tessa rushed to my side, her hands trembling as she crouched beside me. "You're okay. You're okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. She pressed her hand to my wound, trying to stem the flow of blood, but I could see the fear in her face. That's all I could remember. The next thing I knew, I was waking up dizzy, disoriented, and submerged in the sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital. The beeping of machines filled my ears, a constant reminder that I had barely survived. The ache in my neck was sharp, and the bandages were stiff and uncomfortable. I tried to shift in the bed, but even the slightest movement sent pain radiating through my body. The bite from the raincoat girl throbbed, a dull reminder of how close I had come to death. I swallowed hard, tasting blood in the back of my throat. I stared at the ceiling, trying to put the pieces together. Charlotte. How did the creature know her name? That name hadn't crossed my mind in years, yet there it was spoken like a curse, dredged up from the darkest part of my past. The memories clawed at the edges of my mind, and I knew I couldn't ignore them any longer. But Charlotte was only one of the shadows hanging over me. The skin taker and Rentclaw. Where were they? Their absence was unsettling. Monsters like them don't just disappear. They wait, plot, and bide their time until they can strike again. The thought gnawed at me, a constant reminder that my job was far from over. Frustration boiled beneath the surface. I was stuck here, powerless, while those things were still out there. All I could do was lie here, waiting to heal and be strong enough to face whatever was coming next. My eyes drifted toward the window, where the rain was still in sheets. The storm outside felt like a reflection of the one brewing inside me. Everything, the questions, the monsters, the mysteries would have to wait. For now, I needed to recover, to get out of this hospital bed. And when the time came, I'd be ready. I had to be.v. Hey everyone, it's been a while. Things have been pretty hectic lately. After surviving the skin taker, losing nearly half the skin on my arm, and having my good arm ripped off by Rentclaw, luckily, I'm left-handed, and just recently getting my throat torn out by a girl in a yellow raincoat. Well, I've got quite the stories to tell. Let me start with the most recent one, since it's still fresh. All right, where to begin? Well, it was raining, and I got a call from my boss, Tessa. She sounded tired, not her usual self, and that's never a good sign. When Tessa's like this. It usually means an absolute shitstorm of a case is about to land, probably involving a kid or a family member. Those are the hardest, breaking the news to a mother or sibling that their person is dead. Hey, are you done with your break? We've got another missing person report. I struggled to hear the pounding of the rain on the tin roof. Her voice had that tired edge. I put down my meal and replied with a muffled, "Where at? Is it the skin taker again?" "Excuse me," she said, a bit sharp. I swallowed the last bite and cleared my throat. "Where at, Tessa? Is it the skin taker again?" "What?" "No, not so loud," she snapped, irritated. "We haven't found any leads on her yet, give it time." "Crap," I muttered. "Then what is it?" "We don't know. We've got the person here at the cabin, and she's in shock. We need your help to get through to her." "I'll be there in 15, I said quickly, concern in my voice. "And make sure the girl's all right. Did you take her to the hospital?" A cold silence lingered on the other end of the phone before Tessa spoke again softly. "Yeah, about that. It would be best if you saw it for yourself." It's hard to explain. Getting up from my seat, I went to the cruiser and sped off toward the cabin. When I arrived, Tessa was already outside, pacing by the entrance. She glanced over at me, then ran towards the car, tapping on the window and motioning for me to roll it down. I obliged. "We don't know what we're dealing with," she started in a low voice. "The girl seems to be in shock, but she's oddly calm and..." "Is she all right?" I butted in. "No injuries, you have to see it for yourself. I've never seen anything like this before." I gave her a puzzled look but nodded and approached the office. As I stepped inside, I was drawn to a young girl sitting in a chair, clutching a jar tightly in her hands. She couldn't have been more than 13 or 14. Her damp, dark hair clung to her face, dripping with water. That's when I noticed a bandage wrapped tightly around her head. I called out, "Hello, is something wrong?" She turned toward me, and I stumbled back in horror, nearly slipping on the wet stairs. Her eyes, where her eyes should have been, were covered by the bandage, but it had sunken into the sockets. All that remained were 2 red circles seeping through the cloth, giving her the unsettling appearance of a macabre scarecrow. I looked at Tessa, gesturing. What the hell is that, she gestured? I didn't know. I felt a tugging on my coat and looked down. "Are you Detective Vincent Falcone?" she whimpered, her voice trembling. I knelt, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, I am. What happened?" I asked, my tone soft but urgent. The girl tilted her head slightly, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. I could see the fear in her lips. "It's okay," I reassured her, calming my voice. "You don't have to fear me. Falcone can help you." She kept her face straight, eerily composed, when suddenly, without warning, she began to speak. "Promise you won't call the cops." I nodded but forgot that she couldn't see, so I promised. She sighed and began telling her story. Joey, Rachel, and I grabbed our bikes and headed to the old power station by the lake. We broke in, hoping to find something or at least leave our mark to prove we'd been there. Everyone had heard the stories, the whispers of it being haunted, and we were stupid enough to see if they were true. We set out just before dusk with our bikes and raincoats, the wind picking up and making the trees rustle, sprinkling us with water. The sun dipped lower as we pedaled down the gravel path. The trees cast long, twisted shadows across the lake, and the power station loomed ahead, an old, rusting shell, half hidden by overgrown weeds and vines that had swallowed it over the years. Its broken windows stared at us like dead, hollow eyes. "Well, guys, here we are. Who wants to go in first?" Joey said with a grin. Raquel and I exchanged a glance, both of us looking at Joey. When we got off our bikes, Rachel hesitated, glancing nervously back down the path. "Maybe we should come back in daylight," she muttered. Joey scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Come on, Rach. It's just an old building. You're not scared, are you?" But I felt it too, the unease creeping in. I caught a blur of yellow darting past the window from the corner of my eye. I blinked, and it was gone. "Guys, did you see that?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "See what?" Rachel replied, glancing around anxiously. We all turned toward the heavy iron gates as Joey approached them. The gate groaned as she shoved it open, echoing in the quiet air. We slipped inside, our footsteps crunching on the debris-strewn ground. Inside, the air felt thick and stagnant. The walls were covered in faded graffiti tags left behind by other kids who'd been here before us. "See," Joey smirked. "Nothing to be afraid of." But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The silence was louder than it should have been. No wind, no birds, just the distant sound of the lake lapping against the shore. We crept further inside, past rusting machines and broken equipment that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The deeper we went, the darker it got until the light from outside barely reached us. Rachel stuck close to me, her breath quickening. Then, a sound of soft, scraping noise from somewhere more profound in the building. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Did you hear that?" Joey whispered, the bravado in her voice gone. We stood there, listening, waiting, but the sound stopped. Joey laughed nervously, though her voice was shaky, probably just a raccoon or something. But I wasn't so sure. Then we heard it again, footsteps creeping through the silence. When we turned around, we saw someone standing in the corner. She was wearing a raincoat, and a faint mumbling sound could be heard from her. Joey walked up, asking, "Are you all right?" "What are you doing?" Raquel called out, trying to stop Joey but couldn't reach her in time. Joey was only a few feet away from the girl in the raincoat when she turned around. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw a freckled girl with red hair, her eye sockets hollow and caked with dried blood. The girl mumbled incoherently, her voice barely above a whisper, but Joey could make out a single word, "eyes." We heard Joey scream as she stumbled back, tripping over a loose piece of rebar from the ground. She fell hard, gasping, as the girl in the raincoat stepped forward. Suddenly, the girl's mouth opened unnaturally wide, and from its depths emerged an eye with a purple iris, blinking unnervingly as it stared directly at Joey and then shifted to us. Joey scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts as she tried to shove the girl away. She lashed out with both hands, pushing at the girl's shoulders, but it was like trying to move a stone wall. The raincoat girl barely budged, her head tilting slightly as if she were observing Joey's futile attempts to escape. "Get off me!" Joey screamed, her voice breaking with terror. She kicked out, landing a blow against the girl's shin, but it did nothing to slow her down. The girl's cold, blood-caked hands reached out, grabbing Joey by the arms with inhuman strength. Joey twisted and thrashed, trying to wrench free, but the girl moved too fast. In one fluid motion, she forced Joey to the ground, pinning her with unnatural ease. Joey's hands clawed at the dirt, trying to pull herself free, but the weight on her chest made it impossible. As we watched in horror, the eye retracted back into the girl's gaping mouth, which now revealed long, sharp fangs. With a single savage bite, the girl tore Joey's face clean off, the flesh peeling away like paper. She consumed it with horrifying ease, the skin sliding down her throat like strands of spaghetti. Joey convulsed violently, her body twitching on the ground, but the girl wasn't done. She leaned over and sank her teeth into Joey's neck, ripping out chunks of flesh. Blood sprayed across the ground as Joey's body went limp, her final spasms fading into stillness. Panic surged through us. Rocco grabbed my arm, yanking me away. "Run," she screamed, her voice cracking with fear. We bolted, our footsteps pounding against the broken, debris-strewn ground. The crunch of shattered glass and twisted metal underfoot echoed through the space, each step louder in the oppressive silence. I could hear Rocco's labored breathing beside me, ragged and uneven, as she struggled to keep pace. My heart was pounding in my ears, my chest burning with every breath as we sprinted toward the exit, the cold, stagnant air biting at our faces. But behind us, I could hear the soft, deliberate steps of the raincoat girl, unnaturally calm compared to our panicked escape. She was fast, too fast. Before we could get far, she caught up to Rocco, grabbing her by the shoulder. I turned just in time to see her sink her teeth into Rocco's neck, tearing through skin and muscle. Rocco's scream cut through the night, a gurgling cry as blood streamed down her chest. The girl's grip tightened, pulling Rocco closer as she fed, the wet sound of tearing flesh filling the air. Heart hammering in my chest, I ducked behind a broken concrete wall, holding my breath, the cold dampness of the wall pressing against my back as I listened to that horrid thing feasting on Rocco. I covered my ears, sobbing, desperate to block out the horrible sounds. I thought I had silenced it for a moment, thought the nightmare might be over. But when I opened my eyes, my heart froze. The creature was standing there, staring directly at me. Its hollow, blood-caked eye socket seemed to pierce through me, empty but somehow full of intent. Panicking, I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the wet, broken concrete. I lost my balance and fell hard onto my back, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Dazed, I blinked at the sky, the cold air seeping through my clothes, my lungs burning from the shock. Then I saw it. The creature was looming above me, its head tilted slightly to one side as though it was curious. Its mouth twitched, still slick with blood from Rocco, but now it seemed to be examining me. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. I barely registered its slow, deliberate movements as it crouched closer to my face. Its hot and rancid breath brushed against my skin as it spoke, its voice low and sickeningly sweet. "You have beautiful eyes." The words slithered into my ears like poison, sending a cold shock of terror through me. My pulse quickened as the creature approached me, its clawed fingers grazing my cheek. My breath hitched, and I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would leave me alone. Must have it said, but then I felt it. Its fingertips traced the edge of my eyelids, almost tenderly, as if savoring the moment before. "No," I screamed, slapping its hand away and scrambling to my feet. My legs shook beneath me as I stumbled backward, desperate to distance us. But the creature remained still, watching, its gaze never leaving me. Its mouth twisted into a mockery of a smile, and I could hear her voice, soft but menacing, echoing in my head. "Such beautiful eyes. Let me take them." Without warning, she lunged at me, her speed inhuman, a blur in the dim light. I turned and ran as fast as I could, but I could hear her gaining on me, her footsteps growing louder and closer. Panic surged through me, but she was right behind me, no matter how hard I pushed myself. Before I could react, her cold hand clamped around my neck, yanking me back with terrifying strength. I gasped, my feet lifted off the ground as I thrashed wildly. Her grip tightened, and I could barely breathe, the edges of my vision darkening. Her other hand reached for my face, her fingers unnaturally soft yet so cold they burned. I squirmed and kicked, but I couldn't break free. Her fingertips found my eyes, pressing slowly, almost lovingly, as if savoring the moment. A searing pain erupted through my skull, and I screamed in agony as her nails dug into my eyes. My vision blurred, the pressure unbearable. Through the haze of pain, I saw her mouth stretching too wide. Her teeth, jagged and possibly sharp, glistened in the dim light. "No, please," I choked out, but it was too late. Her grip tightened around my throat as her teeth elongated, extending like a predator's fangs, shining with malicious hunger. With a single horrifying motion, her teeth sank deep into my face, tearing my eyes from their sockets with a wet, sickening rip. The pain was unlike anything I had ever felt, a white-hot, blinding agony that tore through me like fire. Blood poured down my face as the world dissolved into darkness. After she told her story, a chill crawled up my spine. Her voice had been too calm, almost too quiet for someone who had just relived something so horrific. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff from kneeling for so long, and winced when I heard a couple of pops. I tried to process everything. Joey, Raquel, the raincoat girl. We couldn't have prepared for what happened at that power station. I gently helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the waiting room. She moved like a ghost, trembling slightly, but never let go of that jar. I glanced down at it, curiosity gnawing at me. "What's in the jar?" I asked softly. She tilted her head toward me, almost protectively, and pulled the jar closer to her chest. "It's nothing," she muttered. I didn't push. "All right," I said, shrugging as I led her to a chair. I ensured she was comfortable, but her eyes, or the place where her eyes should have been, stayed fixed ahead, like she was still seeing something I couldn't. "I'll be back soon," I reassured her, though she didn't reply. She just nodded ever so slightly. I turned and headed down the hall. My mind was a whirlwind, trying to figure out what happened. When I found Tessa leaning against the wall near the office door, arms crossed, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes met mine, filled with exhaustion and questions I didn't have answers to. She told me everything I said quietly. "Joey, Raquel, the raincoat girl. Tessa, it isn't good. Bad." Tessa straightened, her eyebrows knitting together. "What do you mean?" "Tessa. Joey didn't just die, she was torn apart." Tessa rubbed her arms as if the room had grown colder. "I had a bad feeling this wasn't going to be simple," she muttered. "Could it be connected to the blackout incidents? It just feels." I cut her off. "I don't think so. This feels different." I hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the waiting room. "It gets worse. The girl, she's not just in shock. There's something off about her. That jar, she won't let it go. Did she's had it the whole time, right?" Tessa nodded, frowning. "Yeah, she's been clutching it since we found her. I haven't had the chance to look inside." "We need to figure out what's in it," I said, my voice lowering. "But first, let me check something." "You go and check on the girl." "Fine," she said, annoyed, promoted to babysitter. Lucky me. I moved toward the computers I logged on. I searched the database to learn more about Joey and Raquel and to see if any details could help. My fingers moved automatically as I typed their names, the computer whirring softly as it pulled up their records. I scanned the screen for anything that could shed light on what the girl had said. Then it hit me. I stopped typing, my hands freezing in place. I looked at Tessa and the girl when I realized she had never told me her name. A wave of cold dread swept over me. How did she know who I was? How did she know about Joey and Raquel? I turned, ready to ask Tessa if she had noticed the same thing, but the words died in my throat when I saw her. Tessa was lying on the floor, motionless, blood dripping from her eyes. "Tessa," I yelled, rushing over to her, my heart hammering against my chest. I dropped to my knees, checking for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. She was breathing, thank God. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. I scanned the room, trying to figure out what had happened, my eyes darting toward the door in the waiting room. The girl, where the hell had she gone? I ran toward the medical box on the wall, hands trembling as I grabbed a bandage. My mind raced as I stumbled to get the bandages on Tessa. I noticed blood trickling from her eyes, and I turned her over and gasped. Her eyes were gone. They had the same sunken look as the girl, dark bruises forming around them. What the hell? Without thinking, I scruffily bandaged her eyes, trying to stop the bleeding. My hands were unsteady, fumbling with the gauze. I finished wrapping the bandage and placed a hand on her shoulder to calm my nerves. Then I heard it barely a whisper. A mumble was coming from Tessa. What happened? Tessa, I asked, leaning closer, my voice urgent. Tessa, can you hear me? She stirred, her head moving slightly, and then she slowly pushed herself up, confusion written all over her face. She didn't seem fully aware of what had happened. She stumbled slightly but eventually reached her feet, walking toward the nearest chair and sitting heavily. Her breath was shallow, but her movements seemed almost normal. I blinked, bewildered. Tessa, are you okay? She rubbed her temples and let out a small groan. What happened? Why was I on the floor? Her voice was hoarse but calm, as if she hadn't realized what had happened. Tessa, I said slowly, my heart still racing. Do you know what happened? She looked at me, confusion clear, and then glanced around as if searching the room. Her heart darted frantically. Where's the girl? Falcone, she asked, her voice shaky, nerves creeping in. I hesitated, something gnawing at me. Wait, can you see? She furrowed her brows, confused. What kind of question is that? Of course I can see you. Why are you asking? My blood ran cold. I took a slow step toward her, my voice lowering. But your eyes, there, gone. Tessa froze. She stared at me, or at least turned her head in my direction, as though she was looking right at me. Her hands rose slowly to her face. She felt the bandages, her fingers trembling as they traced the rough fabric. Her breathing quickened, and panic swelled in her chest. What do you mean? Tessa asked, her voice cracking with fear. Her hands frantically pulled at the bandages, her fingers shaking as they brushed against her skin. What are you talking about? My eyes are fine. I stepped back, my stomach turning in knots, watching in horror as she peeled back the bandages. Where her eyes should have been, there was nothing. Hollow. Empty sockets stared at me, dark and raw like the girl's. The skin around them was irritated, almost like it had been taken. Tessa let out a blood-curdling scream, her hands desperately feeling the space where her eyes used to be. No, where are they? Where are my eyes? Her voice rose, cracking with terror, her fingers scraping against her face as she trembled uncontrollably. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. My throat was tight, my mind racing. I had no idea how to help her. I could only watch, helpless, as the reality of what had happened to her slowly sank in. Tessa, I whispered, my voice breaking. She sobbed, gasping for air between cries. I can still see you, she whimpered, her fingers hovering over the empty sockets. How? How is this possible? What's happening to me? I had no answer. The helplessness weighed on me like a heavy stone in my chest. All I could do was stand there, numb with shock, as Tessa's cries filled the room. I couldn't leave her like this, but I knew I had to find the girl. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I needed answers. I hurried Tessa to the emergency room, guided her through the